Hi, this is Emily Freitag with Instruction Partners, and as part of our Rethinking Intervention series, I am so glad to be joined today by Shalinee Sharma, the CEO of Zearn. Shalinee, so thankful to have you and excited to dig in together as we learn about what we know works and what we know doesn't in this incredible act of educating children, and excited to talk specifically about our mutual love of math. Please start with your personal story and tell us about your journey as a learner and what that teaches you about learning.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Emily, for including me and for putting this together. It's so important. It was a great question you asked me to kind of think about, which was my own journey as a learner and trying to find one story. And I struggled to find one. And so instead had just sort of these kind of almost like memories sort of come before my eyes, kind of like a movie of just different times where I felt really proud of myself as a learner, or embarrassed or mad, but just, sort of when I had intense emotions. One of the things that I think that was sort of most sort of salient or stuck with me as I thought through those emotions was as a child, when I thought that getting it right was like magical, as opposed to something that I had control over. Like I could build deep understanding and then look at a problem, let's say it was a math problem or a writing task or, a science test, but I could prepare and get to mastery and excellence. And kind of, I think as a young learner, I was for sure a people pleaser. I wanted my teachers to like me. I wanted to be a good girl. And I think that I often thought that, I would get a good grade or, a smiley face on my paper. I often didn't know what was the inputs I had to put in to get that output. I kind of used to think of it as magic. And so I would, be superstitious and wear specific clothes and kind of do whatever I could. But I think I got just really lucky over my path learning, where a few teachers took the time to sort of disabuse me of those notions and sort of teach me how to learn. One of the things, such a simple learning practice, but being able to say it back, close the chapter, you read a chapter of, let's say, a science book or a science text or a social studies text, close it, say back what you think happened in it. Let's say somebody is, teaching me a math question, teaching me a math idea. Can I do it? Can I now change up the numbers and do it again? Just that kind of, that sort of tip, that I kind of got through my journey of learning. And at some point, and for me, sadly, it was college, where I finally understood that it was less luck and more that I could master a topic by getting to deep understanding, ensuring I understood it by saying it back, and then kind of moving forward from there.
Harnessing, bottling the magic so that you always got the smiley face. Interesting.
Yeah.
I appreciate hearing that story. So tell us from your experience at Zearn, from the data you all look at, and from your experience across education in a number of seats, what do you feel like we know that we can really anchor to as we prepare to support the learning needs of students that really have had interrupted schooling? So less what is school going to look like, but more what can we count on in our toolkit?
Yeah. Whether school is interrupted, which is the most difficult year of American education is next year, not this year.
Right. Exactly.
And this year was already nuts.
Yeah.
So but a lot of the answers are actually, we learned them a long time ago, and they're sitting kind of deep in the research base. So I'll just give you a couple examples. There's certainly more than two. This is one of these things where we know lots of things actually. And let's stick with math because that's an area that I have deeper knowledge. So we know that kids are more successful in learning, enjoying, and showing transfer, retaining over long periods of time in new contexts, mathematics when it is conceptual and sort of makes sense and it's a kind of an idea versus when it's like a series of procedures or a trick. You know, how I remember math as a child and how math was often taught to us is, you know, you flip the page to the next chapter and it was a brand new thing you were going to learn. You know, and instead if when math is presented as a slow progression of a few big ideas, we see that children learn it better, they like it a lot more, and they can show that understanding in new contexts and over time.
More resilient learning.
It's more resilient learning. So I think, you know, the more that we can just remember that. So, you know, as we think about how we approach math kind of any time, but certainly in the constraints that next year is going to offer, there's no room for math by card tricks. We really just have to teach the few deep ideas of math. And these were the kind of learnings we learned actually and really articulated in like the 1990s when America did really poorly on the TIMSS exam versus other countries. And as those studies were conducted by famous researchers like Jim Stigler and then synthesized by like Tom Lovelace at Brookings, this is what the findings were. And those findings are equally important next year as they've been over kind of the last 20 or 30 years. The second one I'll share is, and we see this kind of in jaw-dropping way in our data, is that when teachers build the pedagogical content knowledge of the exact thing they're going to teach, not the standards and not sort of abstract stuff, but the exact unit they're going to teach, the exact lessons, the exact content, they are much, much less likely to skip children over the hard work in the grade. And we see this in low FRL and high FRL contexts. And they're basically half as likely to skip kids over the most important work of the grade. So I'll give you a specific example. In second grade, one of the culminating, you know, difficult parts of second grade is multi-digit addition and subtraction with regrouping. And what we see is when teachers build pedagogical content knowledge to teach that, they're much less likely to skip kids over that content. That content was historically sitting in third grade in many states. And so teachers who've taught for a long time, they're looking at it and they're thinking, this is third grade. I don't need to do this. But when we take the time to build that PCK knowledge, kids get exposure.
And make that PCK knowledge just a little more tangible for us. Like what's the launch? What's the substance of the launch that that they need to do before doing that work?
Yeah. So I think the specific PCK knowledge that we believe based on our data is relevant for teachers to let's say expose and teach all their children this component of second grade standards is first just a knowledge of what comes before and what's coming next. That has a huge impact on teachers because when you efficiently present to them what's this building on from first grade and what are the implications of not doing this for third grade, 99.9% repeating of teachers are like, I'm on it, right? So you in an efficient and kind of teacher-friendly way explain how is this all fitting in, that creates deep motivation for teachers. I think the second is explicitly explaining and teaching and modeling and exploring together the multiple access points to that work. So, okay, yeah, there's a standard algorithm, but that's just one way. You know, there's actually other algorithms. There's a place value chart. There's this way to do it concretely. There's multiple access points, and actually taking the time to kind of show how all of these access points work and how they connect across access points. And I think what teachers walk away with is they feel they have a real toolkit to teach this content, but they also have implicitly right there, they know if a student is stuck, they have a remediation toolkit as well, because now they have a new way to look at the problem, a new way to describe the problem, a new way at it. So I'd say that's the
rather than louder and
louder, or the classic approach would be, well, what's 4 + 2? You know, well, that has nothing to do with what we're doing right now. We need to unbundle 100, right? So kind of taking it down to math from the year before, which is actually a different concept, right? So in 2nd grade, we're talking about unbundling. And in 1st grade, we're adding single digit or subtracting single digit numbers. That's not, those aren't the same mathematical ideas exactly, right? So actually giving teachers just a super usable, easy use, practical toolkit, we find is really impactful for teachers.
And it was so often not how teachers were themselves taught. So it requires actually lots of good layers of paint to understand, but teachers too can learn these things just like kids.
Of course. And actually, you know what teachers say when we know we've got them is when teachers say, or at least one teacher in the group says, wow, I wish I had learned math this way. If I had learned math this way, I would have been good at math. I have to teach kids this way. You know, you've got them, right? Because it is true that we were not taught math in a way that was very helpful.
Yeah. Bring us into the tension that we see many educators grappling with between, I have to meet kids where they are and I have to hold the bar high. What from your data and just your understanding of mathematics and how math works should educators keep in mind as they try to think about like what the right thing to do to help advance student learning?
So I think here also where kind of pedagogical content knowledge comes in. But I think the simple way to think about math is that it's not actually broken horizontally. So 1st grade mathematics is in fact arbitrary. That's why when we changed the standards, we moved math from grade to grade. So those grades are arbitrary. And 2nd grade math isn't really anything. That's not a thing. Math is actually a vertical progression. So from, you know, let's say in 2nd grade, we learn about sharing. And in 3rd grade, we explore fractions. And in 4th grade, we explore fractions and decimals. And in 5th grade, we operate with fractions and decimals, right? So this is one vertical idea of math that we've broken up into different grade levels. And so one of the things that's tricky in how math is discussed and described is we will categorize a child as being in 2nd grade math or categorize work, but it actually could just be a waste of time. So for example, a child in 3rd grade could be, you know, crushing it in multiplication and division because their grounding in addition and repeated addition was really strong. And the conceptual description of multiplication and division, let's say in an array, they got it. And they can get to fractions and it's not going well. And the answer doesn't lie in very much of 2nd grade. The answer actually still lies in 3rd grade because we really only open fractions up in 3rd grade. So what would a child do to go back to 2nd grade? They wouldn't do anything. And so what we really have to do is we have to meet that child where they are. They are struggling with 3rd grade fractions, and that's very important mathematics, very, very important. And so what we need to do is present it a different way. And so that's what I would just say is that sometimes there's a place to go back, and that's great. And we can efficiently go back and grab that and come back in. A bunch of times there's nowhere to go back. We're just soothing ourselves by saying, oh, this child's struggling in 3rd grade, let's put them in 2nd grade. There's no help there for that child with that math. And it's because we've used words like 2nd grade math, which is like a fake construct.
Interesting. Are there real constructs? Like what are the load bearing walls, right? That do need to go back. Have you all found anything that is relevant to that?
Yeah. So I think there are definitely, I love that. I think there are load bearing walls, and I think they're pretty nuanced. And we built our number gym, like we built sort of this portion of Zearn Math based on it. But like, I'll give you some examples of load bearing walls that we see. So in kindergarten, one thing a kindergartner should be able to do at the end is count in any direction, starting with any number, ideally within 100, but definitely within 20. So if I say 17 and you start counting down, if I say to a child 17 and the direction is count down, that child should be like 16, 15, 14, right? So counting, starting with any number in any direction. This is a load bearing wall. It sounds really unbelievable that it's a load bearing wall, but quite literally children can't subtract in second grade because of that load bearing wall. And the simple thing there is children spend so much time counting forward. And so they can add because they're using count on strategies, but they didn't get enough practice and like just rote practice counting backward. And when we subtract, we are initially counting down as a strategy. And so that's a load bearing wall. It's a big load bearing wall. We don't do enough with it in kindergarten and American education, especially counting backward. We do kind of too much counting forward. So it's a sort of random example. I could give you another example. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
No, please.
So another example is helping children move out of counting on. So let's say, and doing so in a really scaffolded and intentional way. So we have fourth graders who may see, four numbers and sort of a 4-digit number and a 4-digit number stacked with an algorithm. And in the ones place, you have, let's say, something, 2, something, 4, right? And so they have to add 2 and 4. That's the first step. And they are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, straight up with their hands, counting up to 6. So your cognitive load at this point, there's a lot more math coming. And we can't put that much energy in knowing that 2 + 4 is 6, right? And so where this really comes in is, you can call them fast facts, or you can call them making an easier problem. So a simple thing is like, if I asked you to solve 13 plus 18, it's a lot of work to say,
count.
Up to 18. I mean, you're going to definitely make a mistake. I would make a mistake.
Yeah.
But if you think if we spent so much time working on making an easier problem, and so 13 plus 18, you said, well, that's 2 10s. And then 3 and 8, I know 2 and 8 are a 10 pair. So that's one more 10. And I have one left over, 31. That takes much less cognitive load, right? And so when we don't graduate children in the kind of first, second grade to these alternative strategies of making easier problems, when we get to fourth grade and we're putting all the operations together, children's cognitive load gets overloaded. So that's another load bearing wall.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And what's not a load bearing wall? Like what's something that people might think, oh, I need to go back, that actually, no, you don't. The rhombus probably, right? Like,
very little in geometry needs to be, worried about too much K5. But for example, multiplication and division, right? So when we begin third grade and okay, multiplication and division isn't going well. Let's go back to second grade. There is nothing there for you. There's no load bearing walls before that. It's a brand new concept. Teach it another way. Teach it another way. Teach it another way. Fractions. It's not going well. There's nothing behind it. Teach it another way. Teach it another way. Teach it another way.
Yeah.
So over the course of K5, we open up these big concepts, and what we need to do there is keep teaching them in different ways, not go back because there's not much behind it.
And can you take us for a minute or two into assessment? There's a lot of pushes right now. We have to make sure we're diagnosing kids when they come back so we know what they need to know. Can you tell us what you think wise and unwise uses of assessment might be?
I would say, when children come back, my children, your children, all our children had a really hard spring. This pandemic is harder on children than it is on adults. Children's lives are fundamentally social. They are always playing with their friends. That's what they do. That's how they learn. Like, children are wired to learn and wired to be social. And most of them are isolated at home. And it's very abnormal. And God willing, they do go back in the fall. But what I'd say is, so when we think about, how we want to support all these children and we want to diagnose them, that's great. What the diagnosis has to have, though, to do it, is it has to mean you would do something with that information. You would give them something different, right? So if my own child is diagnosed with, needing more support, then you better have those supports. I don't want a diagnosis that, like, I have a terminal illness and there's nothing you're going to do about it, right? So I think where diagnosis is going to affect a teaching plan, and we're going to actually modify what supports children get, that's interesting. And if we're not doing that, then don't do it.
So
I think
purposefulness, certainly.
Purposeful. And then I think we also just have to look at a diagnosis. Like, is a 45-minute diagnosis going to tell you enough? Is that enough input? Right? Like, a diagnostic that is, I just want to make sure the diagnostic is expansive enough and is covering enough information. Like, the way we build our diagnostic, the first unit of each of our missions is a diagnostic. It's a month, the whole unit.
Yeah.
So it's a month. So I feel really comfortable. I would put your children in that diagnostic, my children, any child in America. Because you get a month of data as a teacher to make decisions based on. I'm nervous about children who haven't been in school taking a 45-minute diagnostic and then making big decisions for those children.
Yeah. The labeling and sorting decisions that we've explored so much can have such adverse consequences on identity and in lasting ways. Yeah. Any final thoughts? Anything else that, if you were talking to a lot of principals and saying, remember what we know, that you would urge leaders to hold on to?
Yeah. I would just say that, I would say what I said before. I would say maybe a few things that I may be repeating myself, but I would say this year was so difficult. Thank you for your hard work. Next year is going to be a lot harder. We should think about using this summer where we can to support children, and less worry about, to think about what a child needs to feel successful when they come back in, right? Like, now you're going to attempt with a group of third graders, you're going to attempt fourth grade. What do these third graders, what could they do this summer? A bit of work. They don't have camp. What could they do this summer to feel successful in fourth grade? And the summer's not over. It's just beginning. And we can email families and reach out to families and, like, text families, like, can we do anything? The thing, when children come back, like, again, children are fundamentally social. Their social emotional learning has not progressed normally. And so before we, like, double block reading and math, and, just remember that they are the ones who had a more isolating and more strange experience than we did. And so how can we support them? I think the last thing I would say is we also need to use next summer, right? There's only so much that can happen in a day for teachers and for students. And so let's do our best to use this summer a bit, all of next year, whatever we get, and some of next summer.
Thank you so much, Shalinee, for joining Rethinking Intervention. And we look forward to continuing to learn together.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for including me.